Hello everyone, welcome back to TCE Talks. This is episode 6, not going too badly. So the topic of my ramblings today is that of the numerous TLAs, 3-letter acronyms that are used to refer to various eras of Jerome Callett's teaching. So you'll know that I use the term TCE, which stands for tongue controlled embouchure. This was a term that was dreamed up by Bob Civiletti in a train station during the period that he and Jerry were working on the Trumpet Secrets book. Interestingly, up to that point, the method, if you like, we discussed the fact that it's not a method, but the approach to playing was previously referred to as the tongue-forward Superchops method, which succeeded simply Superchops and that which came before it, written in the various books. After TCE, there was a period of time when we used the terminology MSC, which stands for Master Superchops. Now, personally, I think that this as a name is it's incorrect, actually. It just doesn't make a lot of sense because MSC was the name of a DVD, this multimedia DVD that Jerry brought out called Master Superchops, or Mastering Superchops even. I may have to go and grab my copy to see which it is. But the idea behind MSC was that you used the material on this DVD to master the Superchops embouchure. So MSC isn't a thing, it's a sentence. Let's all try to master Superchops. There was even a point in the text, in one of there's a section called Questions for Mr. Superchops, and it says, there's a question that's in reference to the tongue-controlled embouchure. And I think the answer to it was something to the effect of, you can use the tongue-controlled embouchure to master Superchops, which makes no sense at all, but let's just leave that as it is. There are other names that are floating around out there. There is obviously, we all know about True Power Trumpet, TPT, or TPWR, I don't know. I don't remember the website, so there's that. And then our friend Silas Xavier down in Brazil, he has his Clínica Embocadora, the Brazilian clinic of Brazilian Embouchure Clinic, BEC. And I think I've butchered that name as well, because he promotes it both in English and in Portuguese. So and what I've said isn't accurate for either language. But really the topic of this little chat is to try to take apart reasons for there being names for this system, reasons for there being multiple names, but also simply just the question of whether it's a good idea or not to be branding an embouchure, if you like, or even branding a set of, how did I refer to it last time? A set of ideals that will help you to, that when used together will help you to become a better brass musician, to develop your embouchure in a certain way. So I think it's probably important to start with discussing why it is necessary to give something a name. And the answer for that would simply be that we need to set it apart from the other things that exist. Now, when I think about what we're kind of trying to, what we're doing here, I think maybe we cannot simply say TCE is playing with your tongue between the teeth. Because there's more to it than that. You could get somebody who adheres to all of the ideals of another system, let's say the Roy Stevens method, and they happen to have discovered that they can quite effectively tongue by touching the top lip with the tip of the tongue. It gives them consistent results. But that doesn't mean that they are doing TCE. And similarly, you could take somebody who practices Einsätzen, Ansätzen, double pedal note exercises every day, and has done for years, as part of the balanced embouchure system. They BE, and equally, they are not doing trumpet yoga. They're doing BE, or they're using the balanced embouchure exercises to develop their embouchure, both mentally and physically. So this is why I think I would say there have to be a certain number of boxes that are ticked in order for somebody to be able to say they are somebody who uses the TCE. But then when I start categorizing choices, or sort of going, well, we need a minimum list of things. Or what was it saying on the TCE UK website? It says Einsätzen, Ansätzen. It says correct use of air. It says tongue between the teeth, and correct movement of the lips. Now that differs slightly from Ralph Salomone's True Power Trumpet, when he says tongue between the teeth and spitting, loose mouth corners, and using as little air as possible or as necessary. It's all very similar. It's actually obviously all comes from the same source. It all means basically the same thing. But, I think that something that makes this method approach, this makes all of this quite difficult, is the fact that we're one of the few schools of brass pedagogy that will actually just, who will say, oh, you are not doing this right. You cannot say that you're using TCE because you don't make the right sound, or you don't do this, you don't do that. And in many ways, this exclusive approach, this elitism, this ideology is horrendous, and it's the worst trait. But I will circle back to what I was saying before, and that is to say, well, look, if you are doing half of it, you're not even going to get half the benefit. Look, there have been many great players that were taught by Jerome Kallett. He taught thousands of people over the decades that he was out there working. And many of them have said, well, I take the bits that work and I discard the rest. And, fair enough. That is what it is. But I don't know what those bits are. What is it that worked for you? Is it efficient use of air? Is it acknowledging, scientifically speaking, that we need less air to play high notes, for example, and that's going to open a big can of worms, because the result of that knowledge means that we can't simply be saying that you have to blow harder to play higher, because that will result in more air going through the lips, and that's the opposite of what we want. And so already we need to start acknowledging the existence of the embouchure, and that its purpose isn't to let air through as such. It all gets very, it's as soon as you start taking on one idea, you tumble down this path where you're taking on a lot of ideas. So there are two sort of points I want to make to take this conversation forward. One of them would be, if I were asked to define my understanding of our development as brass instrument users. This isn't about music. This is about what you do to make sounds come out of a trumpet. Then I would have to say that we need to have a firm grasp on three things: lips, tongue, and air. These three things. Almost all of the various methods or approaches or schools of thought out there will have thoughts about how to do these things. How to use these tools in order to play. Now, this is the thing: is that all of the Jerome Kallett type stuff since antiquity has said very different things about the lips. whereas you will find a binding feature of most embouchure schools will be tight corners, flat chin, which is a generalization, but basically refers to some kind of stability in the bottom lip that is achieved by using the muscles here. We've got two sets of muscles that do this across the chin. I just hit the mic and my sound engineer will not be happy. I've done it again. I'm in trouble. So, using these muscles at the side of your face, no, can't do it the other way around, that to tighten the corners and to basically purse the lips. That means that they are closed at the side and open in the middle. Well, in many ways that, or just to be direct about it, that's the exact opposite of what was being taught by Jerry Callett in the first, throughout his teaching career. He was all about loose corners, keeping all of this not engaged. Now, Bob Civiletti, he will take you down the understanding that we're using the orbicularis oris muscle, the circular muscle that surrounds the lips. That's what you see being engaged when you push the tongue into the bottom lip. And it's what you see engaged when looking at photos of many of the great players of the 20th century. This is something that both Barb and Jerry did a lot, was showing people pictures of that muscle being engaged and using it as evidence for, or an argument at least, that the player was doing certain things with their face. So, lips. Second part would be tongue. Now, in our case, the tongue is held between the teeth at all times, pushing slightly into the bottom lip. And we can talk in more detail about what the rest of the tongue is doing, but essentially that's quite essential. That is our central point of the TCE. Many would say that by working on this, I've said to people in the past that it will result in you using your facial muscles differently, and over time, as one thing takes over, the old habits will disappear. But others would say that you can't actually get the tongue into the correct position until the lips are working correctly, and the lips won't work correctly if you're using your air wrong. And so that's, we end up in this cycle, or we end up in this thing where we just have to we can't use one part of the system. We have to use it all. And so what's the correct use of air? Well, this is something that was never really nailed down in any of the materials that we've seen come from the Callett camp. But essentially, we want to be using, this is my opinion, we want to be using pressurized air and not passive air. And we want to be thinking about releasing that pressurized air through the lips, as opposed to, we could also say we want to think about pushing that air through this gap here. Sorry, sound guy, I just made another hiss on the mic. We want to think about pushing air through a tiny aperture, as opposed to blowing and aiming for flow and thinking about air velocity and all these sorts of things that, sort of take you into a different path. And so the reason for that would be quite simply that if we are following many sort of traditional ways of thinking about air, what happens is you blow the lips into the cup. We get what Jerry would refer to as the embouchure collapsing, and that would just take you in all sorts of wrong directions. The most obvious of which is mouthpiece pressure, because you'll push the lips back into place with the instrument, and so on and so forth. I talked before about how I spent quite a lot of time learning not to blow the lips into the cup, or to keep the lips out of the cup, and that's this is a key part of what we do. Okay, so I don't have an awful lot of time left. I'm thinking that eventually I'm going to have to start allowing myself to just talk for longer. I know that one of the 2 videos I released last week was actually 25 minutes long, but there's just so much information to unpack here. And my opinion, having keeping an eye on the conversations online, and obviously there are no more physical publications of this sort of material anymore, having discussions with other trumpet players and stuff, this information just isn't out there. It's not being discussed sensibly. It has been argued about by people who don't understand it very well. But yeah, we need to, what my goal is in many ways is to promote sensible conversation. So I'm going to present information and say, this is what TCE is. You tell me why it's wrong. Or this is how it differs from what you do. Why don't we accept that both things can work for different people? Which is really how academia should work, isn't it? In one way or another, education and all of that, science, if you like. Okay, so I want to refer to a blog post by Dr. Wilkin, who has a blog called Wilktone. Or I should say his website's called, I think it's wilktone.com. Not actually 100% about that, but you'll find it if you search. In fact, if you do a Google search for tongue-controlled embouchure, then his first of two articles that I've seen on the subject is one of the top hits that you'll get, because it was a very popular criticism back in the day. And I agree with a lot of the criticisms that he makes, but that's much more about communication, poor communication of ideas, than it is about the ideas being wrong. Now, something that Dr. Wilkins says on his in one of his articles is that he really dislikes the branding of a trumpet embouchure, and I understand where he's coming from. He's referring to the word Superchops, which is ridiculous. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend once, where I was saying that I used a Superchops mouthpiece, and he just laughed and said I'd have been fooled by that sort of thing many years ago as well. And I was probably a little bit offended at the time as well. But the truth is, he was right. It is a silly name. But this is what Jerry was about. It was all about sensation. It was all about, he was doing something outrageous to get the attention, and to a large degree it worked. That was his approach. But this is the thing, and I think I might have said it already inadvertently, is that basically because so many of the teachings that come from the Khalid camp are directly contradictory to traditional ideas. It helps to be able to lump them all into one thing. So what Dr. Wilkins says, I think, is in his second article, which I believe is actually a much more balanced analysis. He quite simply and correctly points out that regardless of what you're doing with your tongue, regardless of what you're doing with maybe even your lips and air, every player has two things as features of their embouchure. Number one being an airstream direction. You're either upstream or downstream. And you have what Reinhardt would have classified as a pivot, which means that your lips and mouthpiece relative to the teeth will track upwards or downwards as you ascend in pitch. And I can't really deny that these things are true, but it kind of leads me to sort of define TCE a little bit differently and say, well, really, that this is all about that approach to air, which I tried to describe before, because the model of pushing air, or the model of pressurizing air inside the body and then releasing it in order to create sound is so wildly different from the idea of the air flowing over the tongue, out the lips, into the mouthpiece, through the trumpet. It's so wildly different from that idea that actually maybe we do need to talk about it differently. Maybe we need to understand why someone would come at something from the complete opposite direction. So yeah, I can't, like I said, I can't disagree with what Dr. Wilkins says, but at the same time, the branding to one degree or another is necessary. I think that it's unfortunate the situation we're in now because most of our three-letter acronyms, Legacy Superchops, Tongue Controlled Embouchure, Mastering Superchops, True Power Trumpet, Embouchure Clinic Brazil. That's 6. We've also got the word Superchops. We've also got the book Trumpet Yoga. They really all just refer to different periods of development of one set of ideals. And I would say that the thing that evolved over that time was more about the way that Jerome Khalett taught people than the ideas themselves. The majority of the stuff didn't really change all that much. I think his approach to air changed a lot, and at the same time the result of that was the way that he used the tongue changed a lot. But it's almost a split right down the middle when you look at it as a time period, because the forward tongue position was definitely being taught in the mid-90s. We're talking about 25 years ago, and the 25 years previous to that takes us back to 1970 when the Trumpet Yoga book came out. So there are all sorts of different ways that we can speculate that speculate reasons for these changes. I mean, not least would be the fact that Jerry was constantly innovating as an instrument maker, and that as his ideology surrounding instruments and mouthpieces changed over time, or the equipment he used to make those mouthpieces, or the people he was surrounded with, all the different influences, all the different discoveries he would have made, they would have also changed what is the most effective way for him to play that equipment. And we can't really discount that at the same time. This is why, in some ways, it's very, very frustrating when somebody who plays a Vincent Bach trumpet with a Vincent Bach mouthpiece, using a traditional approach to playing, will come along and say, oh, well, Superchops can't work. It's like, well, it may be much less effective on the instrument that you're playing than it is on mine. I mean, not that I play a Khalett trumpet, but I do have one. So there. Anyway, I think that I've got to a point of rambling a little here, and in order to preserve the quality of the conversation, I'm going to sign off. I think that I'll probably do what I do every week, and as soon as I stop talking, I'll think of all the things I forgot to say. But where were we at? What was the point of all this? I was supposed to be talking about the pros and cons of branding an embouchure system. It's all about promotion, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's difficult to get ideas out there, and I think that maybe the only other approach would be to be an academic in a job in an institution, or a recognized professional in a respected job, which basically means, orchestral trumpet player, or a studio musician for Disney, for example, and then write an academic paper which gets published, so that people can critique it. But that's not a world that is available to most of the players and experimenters out there. And what tends to happen is that, if you were to learn to play well with a technique, what you're not going to do is go, right, well, I'm going to retire as a player now and sit down and write some academic papers so that people can learn about my great ideas. What you're going to do instead is go off traveling as a professional player, which is exactly what Bob Civiletti did, with the Baroque trumpet, and touring Europe with the great European Baroque trumpeters like Ed Tarr and Friedemann Immer and Jean-Francois Madouf and all these people, and and then he recorded a world debut album demonstrating that the embouchure is capable of training you to the point of playing music that no one else in the world has managed to play in hundreds of years. If any living person has ever played all of those works back to back, is probably unlikely. So there we go. So let's not derail myself again. Thank you for watching. please like and subscribe to the channel, like the video, subscribe to the channel. This stuff really helps me out. It helps me not only to understand my audience, but also with the, hacking the YouTube algorithm, as we say. So have a good week, and I'll speak to you all soon about more TCE madness. Thanks.